There's a strange silence in the mountains of southern China, a silence so tense it crackles like static in the air. Then, without warning, the sky erupts in fire. A searing trail of flame slices through the clouds as villagers below scatter in terror. Not from war, not from weather, but from something far more calculated. A rocket perfectly designed, flawlessly launched, now shedding its deadly skin over a place that was never meant to be a battlefield. This isn't the beginning of a dystopian film. It's not even fiction. It's the reality of China's space program. Extraordinary, ambitious, and undeniably dangerous. But not dangerous in the way most people think. It's not the power they've gained, the milestones they've achieved, or the dreams they chase beyond Earth's atmosphere that pose the greatest threat. No, it's something deeper, something reckless, a blind spot born not of ignorance, but of willful acceleration, an obsession with progress so fierce that it leaves safety, transparency, and even human life behind. Let's rewind. The year is 1996. A Long March 3 rocket stands proud on a Chinese launch pad, engines humming with restrained fury. On board is an American satellite, a symbol of the brief moment when the United States believed the rising Chinese space program might offer cheap, reliable access to orbit. And then it begins. The engines ignite. The rocket climbs. But something is wrong. The craft veers violently off course, spinning, twisting, failing. Within seconds, it is no longer rising, but plummeting, its fate sealed by chaotic physics. Then, impact. A thunderous explosion that levels part of the nearby village of Malin, a place filled not with soldiers or scientists, but with ordinary families. Officially, China claimed that 6 people died, employees of the space program. They say the village had been evacuated, but leaked footage, whispers from witnesses, and scattered satellite data painted a different picture. Some Western estimates place the true death toll at over 500. The truth? It's buried under layers of secrecy, like much of China's space history. But whether it was 6 or 500, the message was clear. The price of progress was being paid in blood, and not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. Fast forward to nearly 3 decades later. It's 2025, and once again, villagers are seen sprinting across farmland, children screaming, elders dragged behind, as a streak of fire falls from the heavens. This time, there's no launch failure, no explosion at liftoff. The rocket, another Long March 3, worked perfectly, and that's the most chilling part. Even when everything goes according to plan, chunks of scorched metal rain down across the Chinese countryside. Toxic smoke swirls in the air, clinging to clothes, seeping into lungs. The smoke is not just dangerous, it's lethal. And the people who breathe it in, they live in the wrong place at the wrong time, which in China is often far too many places and far too often. This isn't just a flaw in engineering. It's a deliberate choice, one rooted in decades of fear, ambition, and political isolation. To understand why this keeps happening, why China, despite its immense technological sophistication, continues to endanger its own citizens, we have to go way back. Because China's space story doesn't begin in the 21st century or even the Cold War. It begins in the shadows of Mao Zedong's China, under the strain of revolution and the crushing grip of paranoia. By the late 1950s, China was watching the Soviets and Americans charge into space. They didn't want to be left behind. Reverse engineering Soviet rockets, Chinese engineers quickly began their own journey to the stars. In 1964, they launched a crew of mice into orbit. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And by 1969, the same year the Americans set foot on the moon, China had developed a heavy-lift rocket based on an intercontinental missile. This marked the birth of the Long March series, the same rocket still flying today. In 1971, they began planning a human mission. The date was set, 1973. But history had other plans. China was spiraling into the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. Chairman Mao's campaign to purge capitalist and Western influence turned society upside down. Intellectuals were imprisoned or executed. Scientists were branded as enemies of the state. The dream of space was buried alongside the victims of political hysteria. It would take nearly 2 decades for that dream to stir again. In the mid-1990s, the flame reignited. China returned to its old launch sites with renewed purpose, moving with startling urgency. By 2003, they sent their first astronaut into space, becoming only the third nation ever to achieve independent human spaceflight. While other nations were piggybacking on NASA or Russia, China blazed its own trail using the Long March 2 and their own spacecraft.
They were no longer chasing the pack. They were carving their own path. But that urgency, the relentless speed at which China's space program evolved, came at a steep price. The decisions made in the 1960s, driven by Cold War secrecy and territorial insecurity, were never reconsidered. And one of those decisions remains especially catastrophic: location. Unlike the US, which launched rockets from Florida's Cape Canaveral, chosen because its eastward trajectory carries rockets over the Atlantic, far away from populated areas, China built its launch pads inland. Xichang, the most active of their sites, lies nestled in the mountains of Sichuan province, surrounded by farmland, forests, and villages. It was designed to be hidden, safe from foreign eyes and potential attack. But safe for rockets doesn't mean safe for people. As the rockets climb into the sky and begin staging, jettisoning their empty boosters to shed weight, those massive metal shells don't fall harmlessly into the sea. They plummet back to Earth, into the valleys, onto the villages, through the rooftops of homes and the fields of farmers. And they do this again and again with every launch. But falling metal isn't the worst of it. It's what lingers in the air afterward, a red mist that stains the sky, a chemical cocktail of hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, used as fuel and oxidizer, chosen not because it's safe, but because it's simple. These chemicals ignite on contact, no spark required. It's efficient, it's effective, it's also deadly. This is not some abandoned technology of the past. This is happening right now. With every Long March 2, 3, and 4, a plume of red poison lifts off from Xichang. And when the boosters fall back to Earth, they release whatever residual toxins remain into the air, the soil, and the lungs of anyone nearby. At first glance, the Long March 5 seemed like the answer to every problem that had haunted China's rocket legacy. A modern machine, clean-burning fuel, a launch site surrounded by ocean instead of villages. For a brief moment, it felt like China had crossed the threshold, not just into orbit, but into a new age of responsibility, an era where ambition and safety could finally walk hand in hand. But what came next shattered that illusion. Meet the Long March 5. B, China's most powerful and controversial rocket to date. Towering 33 meters tall and weighing in at over 20 tons, it was designed for a single purpose: to lift the enormous modules of China's New Tiangong space station into low Earth orbit. Bigger, heavier, faster. Too heavy, in fact, for the usual multi-stage launch sequence used by rockets around the world. So China made a bold, almost reckless decision. They skipped the staging process entirely. Instead of separating and shedding boosters in a controlled fall, the Long March 5B pushes its entire core stage into orbit, an enormous body filled with high-speed metal and fuel tanks, hurtling alongside satellites, space telescopes, and even the International Space Station. And once its mission is complete, once it releases the payload, it's just there. A gigantic, abandoned piece of space machinery circling the Earth with no guidance, no plan, and no way to safely bring it down. Other nations don't do this, not because they can't, but because they understand the consequences. Leaving a 20-ton rocket body in orbit is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. Low Earth orbit is not empty. It's crowded, fragile, and increasingly vital to everything from communication to national security. A single collision, just one, can trigger a cascading disaster, tearing through satellites and turning valuable infrastructure into a field of shrapnel. And even if it doesn't collide with anything up there, gravity is still waiting. The Earth pulls it back down, slowly, randomly, without warning. There's no GPS tag, no soft splashdown, no safety protocol. One day, it simply re-enters the atmosphere, breaking apart, flaming out, and sending heavy debris hurtling toward whatever patch of the planet lies below. This has already happened. Not once, not twice, but 4 times in just the past 5 years. In 2020, debris from a Long March 5B tore through villages in the Ivory Coast. In 2021, another booster fell into the Indian Ocean, barely missing major cities. In 2022 and 2023, again, the world watched as global agencies scrambled to predict the next impact zone. Each time, it was a waiting game, a high-stakes lottery where nobody knew the outcome. Just one city, just one unlucky flight path could have turned a harmless return into a global tragedy. What does China say in response? They point to probability. 70% of the Earth, they argue, is covered in water, so chances are it'll be fine. A shrug, a gamble, as if human lives were just numbers on a chart. But what makes this even more haunting is that this isn't a story about rogue nations or incompetent engineers. The people behind China's space program are brilliant, focused, capable. They have achieved what only the most elite agencies on Earth have accomplished. They've landed on the moon, landed on Mars, built a functioning space station in orbit without foreign assistance. This isn't a story of failure, it's a story of values. Because capability without caution is just power without responsibility. And this lack of caution isn't limited to where the rockets fall. It reaches back into the lungs and homes of Chinese citizens, where the residue of every launch still burns. Remember those boosters launched from Xichang? The ones filled with hypergolic fuel, the kind that ignites on contact but poisons on breath? They still fly. Long March 2, 3, and 4 rockets continue to lift off, their engines painting the sky with a red mist of death. It's true that other countries use hypergolic fuel too. NASA, SpaceX, the European Space Agency. But here's the difference. They use it in the vacuum of space, in upper stages or satellite maneuvering thrusters, far from human life, far from lungs and forests and farms. China uses it on the ground, where children live, where rivers flow, where crops are grown. Then the booster, still soaked in toxic residue, falls hundreds of kilometers away, crushing mountaintops and releasing its poison on impact. And yet, this is a country that has already solved the problem. The Long March 5 doesn't use hypergolic fuel. It uses liquid oxygen and kerosene, clean, efficient, and far safer. But that rocket is reserved for prestige missions, heavy payloads, national milestones, high-profile achievements. The everyday launches, the workhorses, they're still using the old poison. Why? Because they're cheaper and faster. Because switching the entire fleet takes time. And in China's eyes, time is something they can't afford to waste. Not when space has become a new frontier of dominance, a new battlefield for power and influence. Every launch, every milestone, every new satellite is a signal to the world. China is here. China is leading. And if people get hurt along the way, if villages are blanketed in toxic fog, or if rocket debris lands in someone's backyard on another continent, well, that's just the cost of progress. But progress isn't supposed to feel like this. It's not supposed to leave people running for cover or looking to the sky with fear instead of wonder. It's not supposed to trade the marvel of science for the weight of dread. Somewhere along the way, China's space program stopped asking a critical question. Not can we do it, but should we do it like this? And the rest of the world? We're all left watching, waiting, hoping that the next piece of metal doesn't land in a schoolyard, that the next red cloud doesn't settle on a village, that the price of catching up to NASA, to SpaceX, to history itself, doesn't come crashing down on all of us. It would be easy to dismiss all this as growing pains, just the missteps of a young space program trying to find its footing in a field dominated for decades by the West. But that would be a mistake. Because China isn't learning in the shadows anymore. It's not a quiet participant, it's not catching up, it's leading. While the US and Russia tinker with aging space stations and budget cuts, while Europe debates long-term strategy, China is expanding its Tiangong space station, building module after module, launching them in quick succession with brute force and staggering speed. It's not just building a foothold in orbit, it's establishing a permanent presence, a sovereign platform in the stars. And they aren't stopping at low Earth orbit. They're targeting the moon. They're planning manned lunar landings, lunar bases, Mars missions, mining operations. They're preparing for the future, and they're doing it with a clarity of purpose few can match. But what does it mean to reach so far, so fast, when the damage left behind is so profound? The scariest part of this story isn't the fire falling from the sky or the poison swirling in the air. It's the silence that follows, the silence from officials, from media, from the people themselves. Because in China, questioning the mission is not just discouraged, it can be dangerous. And so the launches continue. The skies light up, the rockets rise, and no one looks back. The rest of the world watches, hands half-tied. No one wants confrontation in space. No one wants to spark a new Cold War among the stars. So there are statements, there are warnings. International scientists shake their heads. Space agencies send concerned letters. But rockets don't stop with letters. And every time a Long March 5B booster re-enters Earth's atmosphere, there's a moment, a pause, in homes and tracking stations across the planet. Where will it fall? Who will it hurt? What if this is the time we aren't lucky? Luck? That's what we're relying on now. But this isn't about one country being bad or another being good. The truth is more complicated. The Chinese people are not villains in this story. Most of them suffer from this recklessness far more than anyone outside their borders. They've seen debris in their forests, ash in their gardens, and smoke in their lungs. They've buried the consequences while the rest of us read about them in headlines. This is a story of what happens when ambition outpaces accountability. When a nation pushes toward greatness without pausing to count the human cost. And it's a warning to all of us about what the future could look like if we let space become the next place where corners are cut and ethics are optional. Because space isn't just a new frontier, it's our final one. A place where there are no borders, no flags, no rescue teams ready to clean up after a bad decision. What we do up there stays up there. What we break stays broken. And what we destroy, whether a satellite, a station, or a reputation, could echo for generations. China is building the future of space. That's not a fear tactic. That's a fact. But how they build it, and what they're willing to break along the way, should concern us all. There's still time to change the path. There's still time for the incredible minds behind China's rockets to lead not just with power, but with responsibility. They've proven they can reach the stars. Now they must prove they can do it without setting fire to the Earth. Because true greatness in space won't be measured in how fast you rise, but in how carefully you carry the world with you on the way up. And as we stare into the blackness above, as we launch satellites and stations and dreams into the void, we must remember this. The sky is not a landfill. The Earth is not disposable, and progress without people isn't progress at all. Keep watching the skies, but more importantly, listen to the silence that follows. It's trying to tell us something.